The champagne bubbles caught the light from the crystal chandelier as Sarah Martinez adjusted her pearl necklace one last time. The reflection in the gilded mirror showed a woman who had everything: designer dress, flawless makeup, and a smile that had been practiced to perfection. But beneath the surface, something felt desperately wrong. "Sarah, darling, they're about to announce the toast," called her husband Michael from the doorway of their Manhattan penthouse bedroom. His voice carried that familiar tone of controlled impatience that had become the soundtrack of their 3-year marriage. The Whitmore family's annual charity gala was in full swing downstairs. Politicians, celebrities, and business moguls filled the opulent ballroom, all gathered to celebrate another successful year of the Whitmore real estate empire. Sarah had married into this world, trading her small-town teaching career for a life of luxury she never quite learned to navigate. "Coming," she replied, her voice barely hiding the exhaustion that came from playing a role that never quite fit. As they descended the marble staircase, Sarah's eyes swept across the crowd. The same faces, the same conversations, the same hollow laughter. Michael's hand rested possessively on her lower back, guiding her through the sea of expensive suits and evening gowns, like she was another piece of property to be displayed. "Remember what we discussed," Michael whispered close to her ear. "Smile, nod, and don't mention your teaching background. These people don't need to know about your previous life." The words stung, as they always did. Her previous life, as if her passion for education was something shameful to be hidden away. Sarah forced her practiced smile wider and nodded obediently. The crowd suddenly parted near the entrance, a wave of excited whispers rippling through the room. Sarah turned to see what had caused the commotion, and her breath caught in her throat. Woman strode through the entrance with the confidence of someone who owned the world. Tall, with shoulder-length dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, she commanded attention without trying. Her black tailored suit was impeccably cut, and she moved with the fluid grace of a predator who knew her territory. "Victoria is here," Michael said, and for the first time all evening, his voice held genuine warmth. "Come on, you haven't met my sister yet." Victoria Whitmore. Sarah had heard the name countless times over the past 3 years, always spoken, with a mixture of admiration and barely concealed jealousy. The sister who had built her own tech empire from nothing. The one who had refused to join the family business, choosing instead to forge her own path and become one of the youngest female CEOs in Silicon Valley. As they approached, Victoria's eyes met Sarah's across the room. The impact was immediate and electric. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition she couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. Victoria's gaze lingered for a moment longer than politeness required, before she turned to embrace Michael. "Little brother," Victoria said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Still throwing parties to make yourself feel important?" Michael's laugh was forced. "Still breaking hearts and building empires, I see." Victoria's attention returned to Sarah, and this time she extended her hand with a smile that seemed genuinely curious. "You must be Sarah. I've heard so much about you." The moment their hands touched, Sarah felt a jolt of electricity run up her arm. Victoria's handshake was firm, confident, and lingered just a fraction too long. When Sarah looked into those dark eyes, she saw intelligence, strength, and something else, a flicker of interest that made her pulse quicken. "It's wonderful to finally meet you," Sarah managed, surprised by the breathlessness in her own voice. "The pleasure is entirely mine," Victoria replied, and the way she said it made Sarah's cheeks flush. Michael, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, launched into his typical boasting about the evening's success, but Sarah barely heard him. She was acutely aware of Victoria's presence beside her, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way she occasionally glanced in Sarah's direction with those penetrating eyes. "Sarah was just a teacher before we married," Michael was saying, and Sarah cringed internally at his dismissive tone. Was? Victoria's eyebrows raised with interest. What subject did you teach? English literature, Sarah replied, grateful for the genuine curiosity in Victoria's voice. High school. I specialized in contemporary women's voices in literature. Fascinating, Victoria said, and Sarah could tell she meant it. I'd love to hear more about your work sometime. I imagine you have some incredible insights. Michael's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Sarah doesn't really miss the classroom, do? You, darling. She's much too busy with her charity work now. The lie sat heavily between them. Sarah did miss teaching desperately, but Michael had made it clear that working was beneath the wife of a Whitmore. Victoria seemed to sense the tension because her expression grew thoughtful. Well, I think it's wonderful that you had such a meaningful career, Victoria said pointedly. Intelligence and passion are rare commodities in our world. The conversation was interrupted by the evening's master of ceremonies calling for attention. As the crowd turned toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom, Victoria leaned closer to Sarah. Save me a dance later, she asked quietly. I'd like to continue our conversation away from prying ears. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She glanced at Michael, who was already focused on the speaker, then back at Victoria. There was something in the other woman's eyes. An invitation, a promise, a dangerous possibility that both terrified and thrilled her. I'd like that, Sarah whispered back, knowing even as she said it that she was stepping across a line she could never uncross. As the speeches began and the crowd's attention turned elsewhere, Sarah stood between her husband and his sister, feeling for the first time in years truly, vibrantly alive. The perfect life she had built was about to crack wide open, and she found herself eager to see what lay beneath the surface. The champagne in her glass caught the light again, but now it looked less like celebration and more like liquid courage. Whatever was about to happen, Sarah knew there would be no going back. The dance floor sparkled under the soft lighting as couples swayed to the string quartet's elegant melody. Sarah had been watching Victoria throughout the evening, stealing glances when Michael was distracted by business conversations. Each time their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, that same electric current pulsed between them. Victoria approached as the fourth song began, her movements fluid and purposeful. She wore confidence like other women wore jewelry, effortlessly, as if it were part of her DNA. May I? Victoria extended her hand toward Sarah, who stood beside Michael as he discussed quarterly projections with a group of investors. Michael barely looked up from his conversation. Of course, take her for a spin. Sarah loves to dance, he said absently, already turning back to his business associates. Sarah's pulse quickened as she placed her hand in Victoria's. The touch sent warmth shooting up her arm, and she wondered if Victoria felt it too. The slight squeeze of Victoria's fingers suggested she did. They moved onto the dance floor, and Victoria's hand settled naturally at Sarah's waist, while Sarah's came to rest on Victoria's shoulder. The proximity was intoxicating. Sarah could smell Victoria's perfume, something sophisticated and subtle that seemed to match her perfectly. You look stunning tonight, Victoria said softly, her breath warm against Sarah's ear as they began to move to the music. Thank you, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. You clean up pretty well yourself. Victoria laughed, a rich sound that seemed to vibrate through Sarah's chest. I don't get to dress up often. Board meetings and investor calls don't require evening wear. Tell me about your work, Sarah said, genuinely curious. Michael mentioned you built your company from nothing. Victoria's eyes lit up with passion as she spoke about her tech startup that had revolutionized data analytics for small businesses. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah found herself drawn not just to Victoria's beauty, but to her intelligence and drive. It wasn't easy, Victoria admitted, as they turned gracefully across the floor. The Whitmore name opens doors, but it also creates expectations. Everyone assumed I'd fail and come crawling back to Daddy's real estate empire. But you didn't. Hell no, Victoria grinned. I was determined to prove I could succeed on my own terms. Sometimes I think I chose the hardest path possible just to spite them." Sarah laughed despite herself. "I can relate to that feeling." "Can you?" Victoria's voice grew more serious. "What would you choose if you could do anything?" The question caught Sarah off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her what she wanted? I'd go back to teaching. Maybe write curriculum for literature programs, or even try writing myself. Why don't you? Sarah's steps faltered slightly. It's complicated. Victoria's grip tightened gently, steadying her. Most worthwhile things are. Their eyes met and held. Sarah felt like Victoria was seeing past all the carefully constructed facades, straight to the parts of herself she'd buried under years of being the perfect wife. The intensity of that gaze made her breath catch. "You're not happy," Victoria said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sarah's automatic denial died on her lips. Something about Victoria's directness made lying impossible. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." They continued dancing in silence for a moment, the honesty hanging between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. "Sarah," Victoria said finally, "would you like to get some air? This crowd is suffocating." Sarah glanced around the ballroom, spotting Michael still deep in conversation. He hadn't even noticed they were dancing, much less that they'd been talking for 20 minutes. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. "I'd like that very much." Victoria led her through the French doors onto the penthouse's expansive terrace. The night air was crisp, and the city lights twinkled below them like fallen stars. They were alone for the first time, away from the crowd's watchful eyes. "Better?" Victoria asked, moving to stand beside her at the railing. "Much." Sarah breathed in the cool air, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Sometimes, I forget what it feels like to actually breathe." "That sounds lonely." Sarah turned to study Victoria's profile in the moonlight. "What about you? Are you happy?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "I'm successful. I'm independent. I've built something that matters." She paused. "But happy? I'm not sure. I've ever really thought about it in those terms." "That's not an answer." "No," Victoria smiled ruefully. "It's not." She turned to face Sarah fully. "But being here tonight, talking to you, this is the most alive I've felt in months." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and danger. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the truth in Victoria's words because she felt exactly the same way. "Victoria, There you are!" Michael's voice boomed across the terrace, making them both jump apart. "I've been looking everywhere for you two. Sarah, the Hendersons want to meet you, and Victoria, Dad's asking about your latest acquisition." The spell was broken. Sarah watched Victoria's expression shift back into its carefully neutral mask. The vulnerable woman from moments before, disappearing behind layers of professional composure. "Of course," Victoria said smoothly. "Can't keep the patriarch waiting." As they walked back toward the ballroom, Victoria brushed past Sarah, her hand briefly touching Sarah's lower back. The contact was fleeting, but it sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "This was lovely," Victoria murmured, so quietly only Sarah could hear. "Perhaps we could continue our conversation sometime soon, maybe over coffee?" Sarah's pulse quickened at the suggestion. She knew she should say no, knew that whatever was happening between them was dangerous territory. But when she looked into Victoria's eyes, she saw her own longing reflected back at her. "I'd like that," she whispered back. Victoria smiled, and, for just a moment, the carefully controlled CEO facade slipped again, revealing something warm and hopeful underneath. "I'll call you," Victoria promised, as Michael ushered them back into the glittering ballroom. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and small talk, but Sarah's mind kept returning to those moments on the terrace. The way Victoria had looked at her, the honesty in her voice, the electric touch of her hand. As guests began to leave and the party wound down, Sarah found herself watching Victoria say her goodbyes. Even from across the room, she could feel the pull between them, as if they were connected by an invisible thread. Victoria caught her eye one last time before disappearing into the elevator, and the small smile she gave Sarah was full of promise and dangerous possibility. Sarah knew her carefully constructed world was about to change forever, and for the first time in years, she found herself eager to see what came next. 3 days had passed since the gala, and Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Victoria. She found herself checking her phone constantly, hoping for the promised call, while simultaneously terrifying herself with the implications of what she was hoping for. Michael had returned to his usual routine: early mornings at the office, late dinners with clients, weekends spent on the golf course with business partners. He moved through their shared life like she was furniture, noticed but not truly seen. The call came on Thursday afternoon while Sarah was sitting in their silent penthouse, staring at a book she'd been trying to read for the past hour. "Sarah, it's Victoria." Even through the phone, Victoria's voice sent warmth spreading through Sarah's chest. "Hi. I was wondering if you might be free for that coffee we discussed. There's a little place in Soho I think you'd enjoy. Very quiet. Perfect for conversation." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. This was it. The moment she could step back from whatever precipice she was standing on, make an excuse, return to her safe but suffocating life. "When?" she heard herself say instead. "How about tomorrow afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? I'll be there." Victoria gave her the address, and after they hung up, Sarah stared at her phone screen, pulse racing. She was crossing a line, and they both knew it. The next afternoon, Sarah changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple but flattering blue dress and cardigan. She told herself she was just meeting her sister-in-law for coffee, but the care she took with her appearance betrayed her true feelings. The coffee shop was tucked away on a quiet side street, the kind of place that valued atmosphere over foot traffic. Exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage furniture, and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans created an intimate environment that felt a world away from the sterile luxury of Sarah's usual haunts. Victoria was already seated at a corner table when Sarah arrived, and she stood to greet her with a warm smile that made Sarah's stomach flutter. "You found it," Victoria said, leaning in for a brief hug that left Sarah breathless from the contact. "It's lovely," Sarah replied, settling into the worn leather chair across from Victoria. "Very different from the usual Whitmore venues." "That's exactly why I like it," Victoria grinned. "Sometimes you need a break from all that marble and crystal." They ordered their drinks. Sarah chose a lavender latte while Victoria opted for black coffee, which somehow seemed perfectly fitting. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from books to travel to their very different experiences growing up in the Whitmore family. "Michael was always the golden child," Victoria explained, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "Dad groomed him from birth to take over the business. I was supposed to marry well and look pretty at charity functions." "Is that why you rebelled?" "Partly," Victoria admitted. "But mostly I just couldn't stand the idea of my life being predetermined by someone else's expectations." She looked directly at Sarah. "What about you? Did you always plan to be a wife first and yourself second?" The question was gentle but pointed, and Sarah felt her defenses crumble. "No," she said quietly. "I had dreams once. Big ones." "Tell me." "So," Sarah did. She told Victoria about her love of literature, her dreams of writing the great American novel, her passion for teaching kids to see themselves in the stories they read. She talked about the small town where she grew up, her middle-class family who were so proud when she married into the Whitmore dynasty, not understanding what she was giving up in the process. Victoria listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, and never once making Sarah feel foolish for having abandoned her dreams. When Sarah's voice grew thick with unshed tears, Victoria reached across the table and covered her hand with her own. "It's not too late, you know," Victoria said softly. "Dreams don't expire." The touch of Victoria's hand sent electricity shooting up Sarah's arm. Their eyes met and held, and Sarah saw something in Victoria's gaze that made her breath catch. Desire, understanding, and something deeper that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Victoria," Sarah began, but she didn't know how to finish the sentence. "I know," Victoria said quietly. "I feel it too." They sat in silence for a moment, hands still touching, both aware that they were standing at the edge of something that would change everything. "We should probably talk about this," Victoria said finally. "Should we?" "You're married to my brother." The words hung in the air between them, acknowledging the obvious complication that made their growing attraction so dangerous. "Yes," Sarah said. "I am." "Are you happy?" Victoria asked, echoing their conversation from the terrace. Sarah's automatic denial died on her lips. Looking into Victoria's honest, caring eyes, she found she couldn't lie. "No, I haven't been happy in... God, I don't even remember how long." Victoria's thumb traced gently across Sarah's knuckles. "What do you want, Sarah?" The simple question undid her completely. When was the last time someone had asked her what she wanted? When had she stopped asking herself? "I want..." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to feel alive again. I want to remember what it's like to be seen, really seen by someone. I want to stop pretending to be someone I'm not." "And?" Victoria prompted gently. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she forced herself to say the words that would change everything. "And I want you." Victoria's breath caught audibly. They stared at each other across the small table, the weight of Sarah's confession settling between them. "Sarah," Victoria said carefully, "if we do this, there's no going back. You know that, right?" "I know." Victoria studied her face intently, as if searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she stood up slowly, still holding Sarah's hand. "Come with me," Victoria said softly. Sarah didn't ask where they were going. She simply stood and let Victoria lead her out of the coffee shop and down the quiet street to where Victoria's sleek black car was parked. They drove in charged silence to Victoria's apartment, a converted loft in Tribeca that was all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows. The space was sophisticated and modern, reflecting Victoria's success while maintaining a warmth that Sarah's own home lacked. "Drink?" Victoria offered, but her voice was distracted, as if she was thinking about something else entirely. "No," Sarah said. "I don't want anything to dull this." Victoria turned to face her fully, and the intensity in her dark eyes made Sarah's pulse race. They moved toward each other slowly, as if drawn by gravity, until they were standing inches apart. "In Victoria's living room, are you sure?" Victoria whispered. Instead of answering with words, Sarah reached up and cupped Victoria's face in her hands, marveling at the softness of her skin. Victoria's eyes fluttered closed at the touch, and when they opened again, they were dark with want. Their lips met in a kiss that was tentative at first, questioning, giving each other a chance to pull back. But when Sarah didn't retreat, Victoria deepened the kiss, her arms coming up to wrap around Sarah's waist and pull her closer. It was unlike any kiss Sarah had ever experienced. Where Michael's kisses had always felt possessive and demanding, this kiss felt like a conversation. Give and take, question and answer. A perfect dance between equals. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "God," Victoria whispered. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I met you." Sarah's answer was to kiss her again, pouring all of her longing and desperation into the contact. This time, Victoria responded immediately, her hands threading through Sarah's hair as they kissed with growing passion. They were crossing a line they could never uncross, betraying trust that could never be rebuilt. But in that moment, wrapped in Victoria's arms and tasting her lips, Sarah had never felt more like herself. The consequences would come later. Right now, there was only this, the first honest moment she'd had in years, and the woman who made her feel truly alive for the first time in forever. 2 weeks had passed since their first kiss. 2 weeks of stolen moments and secret meetings that had transformed Sarah's world completely. They met at Victoria's apartment, at quiet restaurants in neighborhoods where they wouldn't run into anyone from their social circle, in Central Park, where they could walk and talk without the walls of their lives closing in around them. Sarah had never experienced anything like what she felt with Victoria. Every conversation revealed new layers of connection. Every touch sent electricity through her body, and every moment apart felt like holding her breath until they could be together again. She found herself smiling for no reason, humming while she did mundane tasks, feeling more alive than she had in years. But the guilt was always there too, a constant weight in her chest that grew heavier each time Michael kissed her goodbye in the morning or asked about her day over dinner. Today was different, though. Today, Victoria was coming to the penthouse for Sunday brunch, a family gathering that Richard Whitmore had insisted upon. Sarah had been dreading it all week, terrified of how she would manage to act normal around Michael while Victoria was there. "Make sure everything is perfect," Michael instructed as he adjusted his tie in their bedroom mirror. "Dad's bringing." The Hendersons and Victoria's finally agreed to discuss the merger he's been pushing. Sarah's stomach clenched. She knew Victoria had been resisting pressure to merge her company with Whitmore Industries, wanting to maintain her independence. The idea of her being cornered at a family brunch made Sarah feel protective in a way that surprised her. "I'm sure she can handle whatever your father throws at her," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Michael laughed. "Victoria's always been stubborn, but Dad usually gets what he wants eventually. Family loyalty and all that." The casual dismissal of Victoria's autonomy irritated Sarah more than it should have. She bit back her response and focused on getting ready, choosing a simple cream-colored dress that she knew Victoria would like. The first guests arrived at noon, filling the penthouse with the familiar sounds of business talk and polite laughter. Sarah played her role perfectly, the gracious hostess, making sure everyone had drinks, steering conversations away from controversial topics, smiling until her cheeks ached. Victoria arrived fashionably late, looking stunning in a burgundy blazer and black slacks that emphasized her long legs. She kissed Michael's cheek in greeting, shook hands with their father and the other guests, and gave Sarah a polite smile that revealed nothing of their relationship. But when she took Sarah's offered hand in greeting, her thumb traced a small circle against Sarah's palm, a tiny gesture that sent heat racing through Sarah's body and nearly made her gasp aloud. "Lovely to see you again, Sarah," Victoria said, her voice perfectly controlled even as her eyes held mischief. "You too," Sarah managed, pulling her hand back before anyone could notice how long the contact had lasted. Brunch proceeded normally for the first hour. Sarah found herself stealing glances at Victoria, who was holding her own in a heated discussion about market trends with the Henderson brothers. Victoria's intelligence was on full display, and Sarah felt a flush of pride watching her navigate the conversation with such skill. It was when Richard Whitmore cornered Victoria near the windows that things began to shift. Sarah was refilling the coffee service when she overheard the beginning of their conversation. "You've proven your point, Victoria," Richard was saying. "You've shown that you can build something impressive on your own, but it's time to think about the family legacy." "My company is doing just fine without Whitmore Industries," Victoria replied coolly, "for now. But the market is changing, and you could use our resources. Think about what we could accomplish together." Sarah moved closer under the pretense of offering them fresh coffee, her protective instincts flaring as she watched Richard's familiar manipulation tactics. "I'm not interested in being absorbed into the family business, Dad," Victoria said firmly. "We've been through this." "Have we?" Richard's voice took on a harder edge. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're being selfish. The family name helped you get where you are, Victoria. It's time to give something back. Sarah saw Victoria's jaw tighten, and she had to force herself not to intervene. But Victoria didn't need her protection. She was perfectly capable of handling her father. The family name also came with expectations that I rejected, Victoria said. I've built my success despite the Whitmore legacy, not because of it. The tension in their corner was drawing attention from the other guests. Michael appeared at Sarah's elbow, frowning as he watched his father and sister square off. They're at it again, he murmured. Victoria never could just accept her place in the family. The casual dismissal of Victoria's achievements made Sarah's hands clench around the coffee pot. Maybe because her place should be whatever she decides it is, she said before she could stop herself. Michael looked at her in surprise. Since when do you care about Victoria's business decisions? Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She had to be more careful. I just think everyone deserves to make their own choices, she said, trying to sound casual. Before Michael could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the room's murmur of conversation. The answer is no, Dad. Final answer. Richard's face flushed red. You're being unreasonable, Victoria. This family has given you everything, and you repay us with stubborn ingratitude. This family has given me conditional love and constant pressure to conform. Victoria shot back. I've never asked for anything I didn't earn myself. The room had gone silent now, all eyes on the confrontation. Sarah could see the pain beneath Victoria's anger, and her heart ached for her. That's enough, Richard said coldly. We'll discuss this later, in private. No, we won't, Victoria said, grabbing her purse from the side table. Because there's nothing to discuss. My company stays independent, just like me. She turned to leave, but paused near Sarah. For just a moment, their eyes met, and Sarah saw vulnerability beneath Victoria's controlled exterior. Thank you for a lovely brunch, Sarah, Victoria said formally. Then, so quietly that only Sarah could hear, I need to see you, tonight. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she managed to nod almost imperceptibly. Victoria squeezed her shoulder gently, a gesture that could be interpreted as sisterly affection, but sent fire through Sarah's body. And then she was gone. The remaining guests left shortly after, the awkward tension from the confrontation having killed the pleasant atmosphere. Michael spent the rest of the afternoon complaining about his sister's stubbornness, while Sarah made appropriate noises of sympathy, all while counting the hours until she could see Victoria again. That evening, Sarah told Michael she was having dinner with her college friend Rebecca, a lie that came more easily than it should have. She met Victoria at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, far from anywhere they might be recognized. Victoria looked tired and stressed, her usual confidence shaken by the confrontation with her father. Sarah wanted nothing more than to comfort her, but they had to maintain appearances even here. I'm sorry about today, Sarah said once they were seated at a corner table. You have nothing to be sorry for, Victoria replied. That's just how my family operates. Love with strings attached. It's not right, the way they dismiss your accomplishments. Victoria looked at her with surprise. You were listening to our conversation? Sarah felt her cheeks flush. I was worried about you. Your father can be intense. Worried about me, Victoria repeated softly, and something warm flickered in her dark eyes. I like that. They talked quietly throughout dinner. Victoria, explaining more about the pressure she'd been under to merge with the family business, and Sarah sharing her own experiences with the suffocating expectations of being a Whitmore wife. I've never had anyone defend me like that, Victoria said, as they walked to her car after dinner. You shouldn't have to defend yourself at all, Sarah replied. You've built something amazing, and they should be proud of you, not trying to control you. Victoria stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing under a streetlight, surrounded by the sounds of the city, but Sarah felt like they were completely alone. "Sarah," Victoria said softly, "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been trying not to name what she was feeling, hoping that if she didn't acknowledge it, she could somehow keep the situation from spinning completely out of control. But hearing Victoria say it made her own feelings impossible to deny. No, Sarah whispered. "I think I'm falling in love with you too." Victoria stepped closer, and Sarah could smell her perfume, could see the vulnerability in her dark eyes. "We're in so much trouble," Victoria said, but she was smiling. "I know," Sarah said again. "I don't care." Victoria reached up and cupped Sarah's face gently. "Are you sure? Because once we say this out loud, once we admit what this is, everything changes." Sarah thought about her empty marriage, her suffocating life, the years she had spent pretending to be someone she wasn't. Then she thought about how alive she felt with Victoria, how seen and valued and cherished. "Everything needs to change," she said firmly. Victoria's smile was radiant. "Then I love you, Sarah Martinez Whitmore, completely and hopelessly." "I love you too," Sarah replied, and saying it felt like coming home. They kissed under the streetlight, not caring who might see them, and Sarah felt like she was finally, truly herself, for the first time in her adult life. But even as she lost herself in Victoria's embrace, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that loving Victoria would cost her everything she had built, everyone she thought she could count on. She pushed the thought away and kissed Victoria deeper, choosing love over safety, authenticity over security, and Victoria over everything else. The consequences would come soon enough. Tonight, there was only love, and for now, that was enough. Sarah woke up in Victoria's arms on a rainy Tuesday morning in November, sunlight filtering through the tall windows of the Tribeca loft. They had been meeting like this for 2 months now, stealing mornings when Michael left early for business meetings, creating a secret world that existed parallel to Sarah's official life. Victoria stirred beside her, dark hair spread across the pillow, and Sarah's heart clenched with the familiar mixture of joy and dread that had become her constant companion. She loved this woman desperately, completely, but she also knew their stolen time was living on borrowed moments. "Good morning, beautiful," Victoria murmured, pulling Sarah closer and pressing a soft kiss to her shoulder. "Good morning," Sarah replied, turning in Victoria's arms to face her. Even sleep-tousled and makeup-free, Victoria was stunning. "I have something to tell you," Victoria said, her expression growing serious. "I've been thinking about what we discussed last week." They had talked about Sarah leaving Michael, about finding a way to be together openly. Sarah wanted it desperately, but the practicalities seemed overwhelming. She had no career to fall back on, no independent income, no support system outside of the Whitmore family who had essentially adopted her when her own parents died 3 years ago. "Victoria." "Just listen," Victoria interrupted gently. "I've been talking to my lawyers. If you leave Michael, he'll fight the divorce, probably try to leave you with nothing out of spite. But I have enough to support both of us comfortably while you figure out what you want to do next. We could leave New York, start fresh somewhere else." Sarah's heart raced. Victoria was offering her an escape, a chance at real happiness. But it would mean losing everything: her social standing, her financial security, her place in the only family she had left. "You would do that for me?" Sarah asked quietly. "I would do anything for you," Victoria replied without hesitation. "I love you, Sarah. Not the person you pretend to be for my family, not the perfect wife role you play. I love the real you. The woman who lights up when she talks about literature, who cares deeply about social justice, who makes me laugh until my sides ache." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "I love you too. So much that it scares me sometimes. "Then be scared with me," Victoria said, cupping Sarah's face gently. "But be brave enough to choose love over security." Sarah was about to respond when her phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. Michael's name flashed on the screen and her stomach dropped. He rarely called during his business hours unless something was wrong. "I have to take this," she said apologetically, reaching for the phone. "Sarah, where the hell are you?" Michael's voice was sharp with anger and something else, suspicion. "I'm at my book club," she lied smoothly, the deception coming easier than it should have. "Is everything okay?" Book club doesn't start until noon on Tuesdays. It's 9:30 in the morning. Sarah's blood ran cold. She had been so careful to keep track of her lies, but somehow she had gotten the timing wrong. "We're doing coffee. First today, discussing the chapters." "Cut the shit, Sarah!" Michael's voice was ice cold. "I know you're not at book club. I called Rebecca this morning to ask about your dinner plans, and she was very confused. Apparently, you haven't had dinner with her in months." Sarah's heart stopped. She met Victoria's concerned gaze, seeing her own panic reflected in those dark eyes. "Michael, I can explain. Come home. Now. We need to talk." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, hands trembling. "What happened?" Victoria asked, sitting up and pulling the sheet around herself. "He knows," Sarah whispered. "He knows I've been lying about where I've been." Victoria was already moving, getting out of bed and reaching for her clothes. "Okay, we need to think about this rationally. He suspects, but he doesn't know about us specifically. You could tell him you've been going to therapy or taking art classes or—" "Victoria," Sarah interrupted, her voice hollow. "You don't understand. Michael doesn't just suspect. He investigates. If he's calling me out on the lies, it's because he already has proof." The reality of their situation crashed down on both of them. Victoria sat heavily on the edge of the bed, running her hands through her hair. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. Sarah looked at the woman she loved, memorizing her face, the way the morning light caught in her dark hair, the concern in her eyes. She thought about the offer Victoria had just made, to leave everything behind and start fresh together. "I have to go home and face him," Sarah said finally. "And then we'll figure out what comes next." Victoria nodded, understanding the unspoken implications. Whatever happened next, their secret was about to be exposed, and the consequences would be swift and brutal. They dressed in silence, the easy intimacy of the morning replaced by the cold reality of what they were up against. At the door, Victoria caught Sarah's hand. "Whatever happens," Victoria said intensely, "I want you to remember that I love you, that these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life, that none of this is your fault." Sarah kissed her one last time, pouring all of her love and desperation into the contact. "I love you too. And Victoria, if he gives me a choice between you and this life, I choose you." Victoria's smile was sad but radiant. "I'll be waiting." The ride back to the penthouse felt like a funeral march. Sarah used the time to prepare herself for what was coming, to find the strength she would need to face Michael's wrath and the family's judgment. She found Michael in his study, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. He didn't look up when she entered, just gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit," he said coldly. Sarah sat, keeping her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap. She wouldn't cower, no matter what he had discovered. Michael opened a manila folder on his desk and began laying out photographs. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized herself in each image, entering Victoria's building, kissing Victoria under a streetlight, holding hands as they walked through Central Park. "Interesting reading material at your book club," Michael said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Though I suppose lesbian love affairs isn't typically on the bestseller list." Sarah stared at the photographs, her mind reeling. Someone had been following her, documenting her every moment with Victoria. The violation felt almost as devastating as the exposure. "How long?" she asked quietly. "I've suspected something was off for weeks. You've been different, happier," which seemed strange for someone who should be content with everything I've given you. Michael's voice was bitter. "I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago. Imagine my surprise when I discovered my wife was having an affair with my own sister." "Michael, shut up," he snapped, slamming his hand on the desk. "You don't get to talk yet. Do you have any idea what you've done? The humiliation you've brought on this family? The scandal this will cause?" Sarah found her voice, fueled by anger at his priorities. "Is that really what you're most concerned about? The scandal? What else should I be concerned about?" Michael stood, beginning to pace behind his desk like a caged animal. "My wife has been whoring around with my sister for months, making a fool of me in front of God knows how many people. Yes, I'm concerned about the scandal." The crude language made Sarah flinch, but it also crystallized something inside her. This was who Michael really was. Not the charming husband he played in public, but a man who saw her as property to be, controlled rather than a person to be loved. "I want a divorce," she said quietly. Michael laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. "A divorce? Sarah, sweetheart, you're not in a position to want anything. You signed a prenup, remember? You leave this marriage, you leave with nothing. No money, no home, no social standing. Nothing. I don't care about the money. Don't you? Because I've already spoken to my lawyers. If you pursue this divorce, if you continue this disgusting affair with Victoria, I will destroy you both. I'll make sure you never work in this city again. That you're cut off from every social circle, every opportunity. And Victoria?" Michael's smile was cruel. "I'll make sure Dad knows exactly what his precious daughter has been up to. How do you think the board of directors will react when they learn their CEO has been breaking up marriages? How do you think her investors will feel about the scandal?" The threat hit Sarah like a physical blow. Michael wasn't just threatening her. He was threatening to destroy Victoria's career, everything she had worked so hard to build. "You can't. I can and I will," Michael said coldly. "Unless, of course, you come to your senses. End this ridiculous affair, recommit to our marriage, and we can pretend this whole sordid episode never happened." Sarah stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the man she had married. Not the charming prince she had thought she was getting, but a petty tyrant who would destroy anyone who defied him. "I need time to think," she said finally. "You have 24 hours, Michael replied. "After that, I start making phone calls, first to Dad, then to Victoria's board, then to every gossip columnist in the city. Your choice, Sarah. Play the devoted wife, or watch everything burn." Sarah stood on shaking legs and walked toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Michael's voice stopped her. "One more thing," he said conversationally. "If you try to warn Victoria about any of this, if you contact her at all before you make your decision, the deal is off. I'll destroy you both just for spite." Sarah didn't trust herself to speak. She simply nodded and left the room, her mind reeling with the impossible choice Michael had laid before her. She had 24 hours to choose between her own happiness and Victoria's entire career, between love and security, authenticity and survival. As she stood in the hallway of the penthouse that had never felt like home, Sarah realized that Michael had made one crucial miscalculation. He assumed she would choose safety over love, that she was still the frightened, dependent woman he had married. But loving Victoria had changed her, made her stronger, shown her what she was truly worth. And a person worth loving was also worth fighting for. Sarah pulled out her phone and deleted Michael's number, Victoria's number, and every contact that connected her to the Whitmore family. Then she walked to the bedroom and began to pack. She had a choice to make, and she had just made it. 24 hours was more than enough time to disappear with the woman she loved, leaving Michael Whitmore and his threats far behind. The reckoning had come, and Sarah was ready for it. They could take everything else from her, but they couldn't take her love for Victoria, and they couldn't take her choice to finally, truly live. The perfect life facade was finally cracking apart, and Sarah had never been more grateful for anything in her life